Welcome to Honest Car Reviews. My name is Eric and this is the Range Rover Sport SVR. The largest, most powerful Range Rover out there. It is arguably the most analog performance SUV right now. When everyone else goes for smaller displacements, turbos and hybrid tech, the Sport SVR with a supercharged 5-liter V8 with 575 horsepower and 700 Newton meters of torque feels almost ancient. But maybe that is the point with this car. Back when things weren't so complicated. The Sport sits just underneath the regular Range Rover with a more nimble and not as towering silhouette. Underneath the Sport sits the Velar, and then you have the Land Rover side with more rugged exterior, but in the end it is the same company, Land Rover, that produces this Sport as well as the Discovery and so on. As you can see, in the front are massive radiators as well as special cooling ducts. The brakes are larger Land Rover, these 22-inch rims that houses 285 tires, both front and rear, lower side skirt, and this chiseled exhaust tip. The exhaust, as you will hear later, sounds amazing. All of these details are quite minor in comparison with the regular Sport. The sheer volume, together with the unmistakable front, not overdone with massive grills, and the two solid lines that go from the front to the rear. And don't forget the massive kitchen table sized hood that don't lean, so you actually can judge the car's corners quite easily when you park and drive on the highway. Black paint, black rims and black accent. It looks absolutely menacing. Look at the fitment of this front lip. If I were you, I would take it to the dealership and ask what this is all about, because I mean, you pay 150,000-160,000 euros for this fitment. This is a really large SUV, so it is GLS size, it is X7 size, it is Q7 size. So we'll look into the rear luggage space, and here are some washing products. But I mean, it is decent, it is large, but for a car of this size I would expect it to be a bit bigger than it actually is, because this has not 7 seats. There is a lot of sound deadening around the car that eats up a lot of space. Underneath we can see there's a humongous space for a full-sized tire, but now it's just a, I think that's the pump for the air suspension. They could have done it deeper, but then you wouldn't be able to have a full-sized spare wheel. One thing to notice: the button for the rear door is mounted quite far in behind, and since you need to press it quite firmly, it will be a bit difficult the first time we'll try it. But let's close it and go into the rear passenger seat. And they have a bit of an indent here, but of course they are nowhere near as huggy as those in the front. A lot of dark materials. I like this suede soft material. Quite a lot of foot space, but since these are sport seats, they have a hard plastic rear. So under some more spirited driving, the knees will hit. And for a car of this size, I would expect to fit more than comfortable in the rear seats. But I love the choice of materials and the design of these seats as well, especially this diamond shaped stitching and these openings and the SVR logo. Special vehicles operation, but SVO is Ford's performance department for some of the models. So they have SVR, and R sounds more cool than O. You have a full-size panoramic sunroof, which I can open up, which I can't open up. And you have an armrest with cup holders. This feels utterly plastic, utterly flimsy. I mean, that's a joke. You have individual climate control in the rear. You have 5 volts, old USB type, charging ports, and a 12 volt cigarette lighter. This looks pretty outdated compared to the front climate controls. That is often the case for a lot of other cars, but it would be nice to have some better fitment and some better design in the rear climate controls. The controls for the side windows are, I mean, over 10 years old, and they sit quite far up. So even though they are quite easy to reach, it would be nicer to have, like every other car has, down here. But Range Rover has taken quite an interesting route in how to design the side door panel, and I'll go further into that when I go into the front seats. This sits on air suspension, so you can lower and raise the rear part of the car, and of course you have towing hook and lights if you have a trailer behind you. Of course, seating controls, even though these are sport seats. But this is completely different to any other car manufacturer in how to design a side door. You have an opening here that is really small. I mean, it feels sturdy, but the size is really small. And when this door is closed, the angle to go down here is really small. So when you try to fit a bottle, it will be difficult to get it out. I'm not trying to make this a bad thing, but the interior and how it's designed feels like an ultra luxurious truck. I really like this interior, but it's completely different compared to BMW, Mercedes and Audi. And maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll get to that later on. Meridian sound system sounds amazing. I particularly like the Meridian sound system that was in the Velar. I think this sounds quite similar, and it is just a good sound system. Because of this massive armrest, this massive center screen, together with the huggy seats, even though this is a huge car, and in comparison to being a huge car, it feels almost claustrophobic to sit inside. Everything feels really tight. Now I'm getting used to it, but it's still not as airy as I thought it would feel to sit in the Range Rover Sport. The digital gauge cluster is the same as in almost every other JL8 product, so Jaguar, Land Rover and Range Rover. It is a bit slow, it doesn't respond that well, and the customization is nowhere near as good as Mercedes MBUX system. The Defender's infotainment system, the Jaguar I-Pace infotainment system, was really good. This feels much older. You get used to it, but in comparison to other products from the same company, it feels weird that the top dog gets a slower infotainment system and not as a nicely designed infotainment system. Down here, climate, seats. You can have, the seats are both heated and ventilated. Nice action to control, to go into seats. So cool seats and warm seats. I'll make them not warm. Here's the vehicle's dynamic control manager. So there's comfort, there's echo, and you can see the slow response. You have dynamic. You also have, you can hear that the exhaust button went on. If you press this button, you have automatic terrain response. So it will register what you're driving on, how you're driving, and change all the settings accordingly. That's something that Range Rover has dialed down. It is air suspension, so right now it's in the lowest position to make it easier to get in and out, but you can of course have it in the general setting and take it into off-road mode. And the car really raises up. It's more than just a couple of centimeters. Quite cool. That's all for the climate, the different suspension, the different settings. If you press the helmet here and you press dynamic, you can set individually how the engine should behave, the gearing, the steering, the suspension. And the suspension, I think at least, doesn't change that much from comfort to dynamic. The car, when accelerating, sounds like 1,000 roaring lions. And this is the best sounding V8 right now. The overruns, it sounds like gunshots. When you shift, there's some burbles. I mean, it is great. And even though right now there are OPF filters, there's sound restrictions, I don't understand how Land Rover was able to make this engine sound so amazing and so loud. This car weighs almost 2.5 tons. And even though it has 575 horsepower, it does 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 4.5 seconds. And often with high horsepower engines and cars, they come to its own and the high horsepower really kicks in over 100 kilometers an hour. But since this car aerodynamically is like a brick, that doesn't happen, which means that it pulls, but the over 100 kilometers an hour it doesn't feel any faster. And thanks to the supercharger, the power delivery in general is really linear. Thanks to the 285 tires all around, it doesn't misbehave unless you really try to. On the highway, when you hypermile, it averages about 0.92 liters per 10 kilometer. In the city, about 2 liters per 10 kilometer. And when you really drive the heck out of it, about 3. This is probably the fastest car I've ever driven. And that doesn't matter, because this car is such a gem right now in this day and age. Even though it is big and heavy, the air suspension really soaks up the bumps. During more dynamic driving, it doesn't feel like a fish out of water. It feels actually quite planted and it doesn't roll around that much. And to take this on some back roads is no problem. It is quite enjoyable, maybe not as aggressive perhaps as Mercedes AMG SUVs. The air suspension is really nice at soaking up bumps, but it also makes the car feel a bit disconnected in terms of what's happening under the tires. And that engine just dominates the driving experience. And especially at 5,000 or 6,000 RPMs, it is crazy how much it just screams. And since it is a V8, you have so much torque really low in the rev range. And the over revs. That muscular but classic exterior combined with that amazing V8 supercharged. I mean, it's just an amazing combination. Such a difference between full throttle acceleration and half throttle acceleration. So from second gear, 30 kilometers an hour. How do I finalize this car? This rather mechanical, old school performance SUV. And I actually think I just did. Having this big, stonking, old school supercharged V8 is unique in this day and age. and probably this will be the last of this engine in this type of car. Hybrids, V6, turbochargers, bringing down emissions. Having to see this probably go brings a tear to my eye, because Land Rover has really found a niche with this car. It doesn't have to be the fastest 0 to 100 km/h. It doesn't need to have the most advanced tech. It doesn't need to have the coolest, most future-looking interior. Land Rover knows what they're doing with their cars, their exterior, their interior, their drivelines, and that's really noticeable. That maybe it doesn't have the same power as, for example, the Mercedes G63, the Mercedes GLS 63, the BMW X7M, the Audi Q7, RSQ7, RSQ8. The Range Rover Sport SVR is still a breath of fresh old school air in today's world. And that's my final review for the Range Rover Sport SVR. See you next time.